Today, we're looking at a yellow ink by Oto, Yamabuki Iro. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, there's timestamps down below so that you can skip around to the parts you're most interested in, but if you've got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. You can also follow me over on Instagram, and if you're new here and like fountain pen inks, I would invite you to subscribe. I do a new ink review daily. In order to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into this Noodler's Naponset with a music nib, wrote with it for a day, and then used it to take the notes for this video. I always standardize some of my writing samples by using Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper, although I do use more papers, and some of those will be seen later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it came in a vial something like this. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no real shading. It's a very nice dark tone. The extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, and some very nice shading. Look at how brown starts darker, gets lighter, gets a little bit darker in the middle of the end. Quick starts dark, gets lighter, gets very dark again. People are going to avoid this because of its color, and it's fantastic. 8 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, and look, it's got very nice shading going on. Look at brown, look at fox. Nice, 11 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation, and we get plenty. Tomoe River, no bleeding, a very light Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. The extra fine is the same tone as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. I'm going to back up to the stub because I am seeing halo in areas where you have more passes, like on the letter K. I'm starting to see the halo that's there. So there is halo that can show up. Back to the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 13 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine. No feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 19 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both show no color variation, and we're really not getting it in the writing. Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does have some shading, not just where I went ridiculous on the K, but on the first K you do see some, on the Oto you do see some, so there is some shading in the stub. The extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, some nice shading going on. The goes light to dark to light in 3 letters. Over goes light to dark, 9 seconds to dry. Medium is ever so slightly darker than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, and very nice shading. Brown starts darker, gets lighter. Nice. Over goes light to dark. 13 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both does show us plenty of color variation, and we do get it. This is a very usable yellow. I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this very, very light kind of cucumber, like a cucumber tea green at the bottom. Now it pushes its way up and we start to see a bunch of yellows and a nice darker orange at the top, which is where our shading is coming from. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. Now that cucumbery tea looking color on the bottom, much more gathered in there, really soaking into the filter paper. Although because it's so light, I'm not sure how resistant it's going to be. The rest of it pushes up where we still see the yellow, we still see that very nice darker orange at the top. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, despite the fact it did have some issues when we look at what's going on with the capital H, I'm surprised it handled itself so well. Now, I still wouldn't use it in a note-taking situation if I want to highlight, but I'm surprised it handled itself that well based on the chromatography. Looking at the water, I'm surprised that it didn't do very much. That it really only took some of the darkest layers, but really left most of that ink. Now, pen flush is starting to break it up. At the very top of it, we do start to see some of the white of the paper coming through. Thankfully, that just means that given a little bit more than 30 seconds and some elbow grease, pen flush is all that you need to get this out of your pen. Now, the 1/3 bleach solution does completely eliminate it from the paper, but it's not needed here. I test viscosity or flow by using a tilt test that I've linked in this video. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Kayono Oto's Yamabuki Iro has a viscosity of 1.13, making this a super wet ink. 1 is water. This is 1.13. Holy moly, is it wet. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. I find this by using my writing samples that were done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Tag Kayono Oto's Yamabuki Iro has an average dry time of 12 seconds, so despite it being ridiculously wet, its dry time is a bit faster than normal. Instead of finding inks that look like tag Kayono Oto's Yamabuki Iro, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Now this is a yellow with a very orangey brown leaning tones to it, so I decided to go with a nice brown ink. I went with Diamine Ochre. The second writing sample is done on black and red, hazel, and white lines paper. Here we're looking at black and red notebooks. We're going to get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer some shading. It's not incredible, but it most certainly is there. You see that K is much darker than everything else around it. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer some shading, like the K in quick is darker, the B in brown is darker, the P in jumps is darker. This paper is just a little more absorbent and the shading's harder to see. Medium is darker than the extra fine, not quite as dark as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 7 seconds to dry. Now, the scrubby of the extra fine shows a little bit of color variation, far left to far right. The medium shows none. That's about what we're getting, but this isn't really your shading ink for this paper. How about hazel notebooks? No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen, and some very nice shading for this pocket notebook. Look at what's going on the Yamabuki Iro across the bottom, where it's going from darker to lighter to darker to lighter to very dark to light. Nice. Extra fine is lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, not a lot of shade, 4 seconds to dry. Medium gets darker than the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and the shading does come back. Look at how quick goes from dark to light to dark. Brown goes from dark to light. Fox from light to dark. 5 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine does show color variation left to right. The medium does left to right. But we don't really get it in the extra fine writing sample, and we do in the medium. Last up is white lines. So with the white lines, we do get a bunch of bleeding when it comes to the medium. Not too bad when it's on the extra fine. The medium means we have a lot of show through, but the extra fine's not too bad. The 1.1 has feathering. That K has a lot of feathering. The R, a lot of feathering. The O, a lot of... It's all tiny, tiny feathering. It won't stop you really from being able to use and read this, but it's there. Okay? It has no spread halo sheen. It does offer some shading. You can see that it starts to feather some where it's a bit darker. No feathering where it's quite a bit lighter, but there is some shading in the stub. Now the extra fine is a bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, and some very nice shading. Look at how brown and lazy, very different tones. And look at the way brown is shading and lazy is shading sort of opposite of it. So this is very nice here, and it's a gray tone paper. 4 seconds to dry. Medium is quite a bit darker than the extra fine and darker than the stub. The medium has a ridiculous amount of feathering. This whole top line has tiny feathering the whole way through. It's almost easier to say that the AZ and lazy are the parts without tiny feathering. Everything else really has it. No spread, halo sheen, and yes, decent shading in that it's there, and I really don't expect it too much with this paper. But there is some there. If you look at the word quick, it's darker than the word the. So there's definitely some going on, just not a whole lot really. I wouldn't call that really shading here. 6 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine does show some color variation. The scrubby of the medium shows none. The extra fine, we saw the color variation much better than we did in the medium. And that is all that I have for the writing sample. So what do I think of Kayono Oto's Yamabuki Iro? I think yellow inks are wildly overlooked because we just assume they're not going to be readable. This one is absolutely amazing. It is a yellow that does shade itself to green, but the idea that it gets classified as yellow means people won't look. This is really gorgeous on the page with every pen that I used. I'm very happy that I got to try it. I might have to try it again. So what nib and pen give the best writing experience with this ink? I found that broad wet pens really brought out the color in its best ways, and the shading looked absolutely amazing. Broad and wet, that's the way to go. I put out a new ink review every single day, so that if you're not already subscribed, I'm going to remind you, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching.